Hopefully you guys can start to hear me pretty soon. We're going to get started here in just a second. I just want to make sure that the mic is working, so can you guys please let me know when you can hear me? If you heard me double twice, that should be stopping momentarily here. So let's kind of get rolling here. So Mrs. Kipperman posted the key to the study guides here on your Google Classroom. So if it's there if you want to get it. Remember, don't forget that it is going to be due the day you take your test. So for even days, that is tomorrow, and for odd days, that will be Wednesday. If you guys didn't get my message the first time, our even days classes are going to be taking the first 35 questions of the 50 tomorrow during the shortened period, and we'll have to finish up the exam on Thursday. And that's just Wednesday, not Thursday. Thursday, no, that's right. That's just the way it's going to be, unfortunately, as a result of the shortened day tomorrow with the 2-hour delay. So let's kind of jump in here. I'm going to open the key, and we will get started with going over this. So my cat's just going to be in my lap here. I don't know if you guys can see him or not, but all right. So we are talking cumulative test, right? So this is a large test. There's 50 questions, but it really does cover quite a bit of material. It covers all of the material for the quarter, right? So we began the quarter discussing about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and we went all the way to the revolutions in the 1800s and the unification of Germany and Italy and such. So let's kind of dive in here and begin talking. So if you haven't done your study guide, this would be a great time to pull it out and to just fill it in and as I talk it over, right? So starting in the mid-1500s, people began thinking about the world in the physical way, in a new way, right? And this is going to come around the scientific revolution. So these people in particular, along with others, but these are not obviously the only scientific thinkers of the time period, but some of the major ones are listed right here, and their work is going to really change the way people think about the world, right? So for starters, you have Nicholas Copernicus, who he comes up with this idea of the heliocentric theory of the universe, which simply means, for anyone who remembers, basically the Earth revolves around the sun, right? So the sun is the center of the universe. We obviously know it's not the center of the universe now, but as far as they were concerned, it was at that point. And it does center of our solar system, though, right? So beyond that, you have Johannes Kepler, and Kepler, he dives more into the work of planetary motion, in particular that planets orbit the sun in this elliptical orbit, right? And that's going to be used by Galileo and Newton and things like that, and expansion later on. So Galileo is going to use the telescope. He's going to help create the telescope. He'll really help refine the telescope more than create it to support this heliocentric theory with the math and calculations around it, right? He's going to be able to observe it up in the sky with the telescope. So you have Newton. Newton does a number of things, but the laws of gravity are super important, and that is, it is, right? The laws of gravity, the laws of motion, and Isaac Newton is this brilliant scientist and mathematician who invents calculus, among other things. Really important figure in history for a number of reasons, right? So we also have this man named William Harvey, who works with the human body and does tremendous work with the circulatory system, the whole idea of circulation of blood in the body and things like that, right? So the scientific revolution is going to place emphasis on reason, right? And you're going to have this whole idea of the scientific method that's going to come out. That's how we do science today, right? You've all learned about the scientific method, the steps, being able to formulate a hypothesis and to test that hypothesis and come up with evidence to support a claim or not support a claim, and right? Those things are super important in today's world too. So the Enlightenment, and this in particular area, this is going to become known as the Age of Reason, right? With the scientific revolution coupled together with that. So the Enlightenment in particular is going to expand now on, so we have the scientific expansion, and now we're going to have the philosophical expansion of the world, right? So you have a man named Thomas Hobbes, and Thomas Hobbes writes a book called The Leviathan, and the Leviathan, the big gist of it is that he believes in a strong government and absolute monarchies to manage behavior, and he talks about what's called a state of nature, right? The state of nature, effectively, people are selfish and are going to typically act in selfish manners, and it creates a state of nature and a constant state of war of people, right? So next you have this man named John Locke, who writes this book, among others, again, called The Two Treatises on Government, and that government gets its power from the consent of the people, right, is the big conclusion that John Locke makes. You have this whole idea called natural rights of life, liberty, and property, right? Those things are super important for John Locke to understand that. And John Locke is going to be used heavily in the American founding documents, as we've talked about quite a bit. So you have another man named Montesquieu, and he writes on the spirit of laws, and he talks in particular about the separation of powers and the three different branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, which are going to also be used for to model our government off of, which is one of the reasons why you're supposed to know him, right? So we also have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talks about what comes known as the social contract, and which is the government, again, acts as this contract between the people and the rulers, and that people's morals, right, and collectively they decide how society should be governed, right? The people and the rules that it should be governed under is what this social contract is. And then lastly, you have Voltaire. Voltaire, the biggest thing that's going to come out of him that you should familiarize yourself with is this whole idea of separation of church and state, and religious freedom is Voltaire. Okay? So moving further down, you have these political philosophies. We know that they fuel multiple revolutions around the world. We have the American Revolution and the French Revolution, which the successes from those are going to fuel revolutions elsewhere in the world too, right? So we know Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, incorporates these Enlightenment ideals for sure, which we were just talking about. He draws heavily on Locke. If you just read the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and amongst these, yada, 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 right? So you have the natural rights brought there. It goes further on to talk about, government getting its power from the consent of the government, and such. So the Declaration of Independence is super important because it draws on all of these things to lead to the American Revolution, which gives us our government and our own country today. So we have two other big documents that draw on them, right? The Constitution draws heavily from Montesquieu with the separation of powers, and you have the U.S. Bill of Rights too, which you're going to get a little bit of Voltaire from, with the religious freedom, among other rights as well. So the Enlightenment also stimulates religious tolerance, which we were just kind of talking about. Okay, so other forms of things that are going to be coming from this time period we should know, right, is that this new form of literature is going to come out of the Enlightenment too, called the novel, right? So people aren't just writing nonfiction at this point, or philosophical works. You have people like stories, right? And these stories are going to start to be written down and be made up, and novels are particularly novel, I suppose. So you have this man named Miguel de Cervantes, who is going to write this book called Don Quixote, or the Man of La Mancha, essentially. And this is going to become a big piece of work from this time period, and people are going to read it, right? And the novel's going to spread, and you're going to get more and more of them until we have the novels and the books and stuff that come out all around today, right? So other people you should familiarize yourself with are some of the artists and composers of the day. You have Johann Sebastian Bach, who is this Baroque composer, which we listened to a bit in class. You have Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who is a classical composer. You have Eugene Delacroix, who is a painter, which he has the famous painting of Lady Liberty leading the charge. You've got Voltaire. We know he writes the Candide, and it's about religious freedom. And you've got Cervantes here again with the novel and Don Quixote. I'm not actually sure if Delacroix was actually a writer. Maybe you can look that up quick for us while I continue going here. But anyway, so other improvements that you should familiarize yourself with is the ship design. So ship design at this point is going to continue to improve. Remember we talked about the caravels, but the improved ship design and the faster ships, and you're going to start to get clipper ships and things like that, are going to extremely lower the cost of transportation because they just bigger ships that move faster, and if that's the case, you can move more goods more quickly, and the cost of transportation will go down, right? Farm tools, certain farm tools are going to increase productivity around the time period too, which is a big deal. More people can get food that way, right? And then you're going to have all-weather roads as well, instead of just having dirt and mud, dirt roads that turn into mud essentially in the spring when it's rainy and such. That's important, right? So you increase trade and you have year-round transportation as well. Okay, continuing on here. So moving into the revolutions a little bit, we have the French Revolution, which is obviously influenced by the Enlightenment ideas, but also influenced by the American Revolution, right? With the successful American Revolution, the French people who lended a hand to the Americans are going to essentially say, why can't we do this ourselves? And they're going to overthrow their monarch, right? You're going to start with the fall of the Bastille, and you get all of that good stuff. The march on Versailles. You're eventually going to get the killing, well, the execution of Louis XVI, sorry, and Queen Marie Antoinette, which is going to all fall into this reign of terror, right? And so, anyway, you have the Bastille, had been a political prison for people who had opposed absolutism. The Bastille's fall, it was the start. It's considered the start of the French Revolution. Bastille Day is essentially July 4th in France, right? It's not on July 4th, but it's like the Americans' 4th of July celebration. So the French Revolution ends the absolute monarchy of Louis XVI, and it's going to give rise to Napoleon himself, right? So let's talk about Napoleon here. You have Napoleon, who is going to declare himself Emperor of France after the revolutions. That it's a big spiral till we get to Napoleon, obviously, but we've talked about that in quite detail in class, so we're not going to necessarily linger there for this tonight. So who are the countries that Napoleon went to war with? Effectively Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England. It's many of these other monarchies that don't want the ideals of the revolution to get out, right? They like being in charge, these monarchs. They want to stay in charge, and they want to do everything to suppress the ideas that people can govern themselves, right? So you're going to get the famous last battle at Waterloo, where Napoleon is defeated by the Duke of Wellington, and other people, of course, too. But you're going to have Napoleon ends up being exiled as well at Elba and St. Helena. And the 5 big characteristics of the Napoleonic Code you should be familiar with, right, is the new code of French law. You're going to have all citizens equal before the law, right, which is a big deal. Religious toleration, it's fairly pro-business, and it does discriminate against women here. So anyway, you have now what city do they meet, right? The Congress of Vienna meets in Vienna, Austria. It's given the Congress of Vienna as the name. In the 4 victorious powers, you're going to actually have France as a member in these discussions, right? Inviting the losing power is a pretty big deal. Normally the losing power wouldn't have much of a say, so that is kind of important that the French could kind of advocate for themselves a little bit going on. So right at the meeting, what they're looking to do, and we had our little simulation in class, but the big thing that's going to come out of it is they're going to redraw the lines to kind of pull away from what Napoleon had drawn himself. You're going to restore the monarchies to the thrones, but again, the monarchs trying to throw off the ideals of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. They're going to restore the balance in power, trying to make relatively equal nations in Europe. And they're going to surround France with strong countries, essentially, so that Napoleon could not happen again, was the idea, right? So the balance of power, all powers have the same strength. That's the idea, right? That's what balance of power means. So why do they want it? So that no country could be a threat to kind of one another, right? Okay, so you're going to get these 2 new political philosophies that are arising out of Europe during the 19th century. So you have conservatism and liberalism, right? So conservatism is essentially liking things the way they are to some extent. They don't want change necessarily, right? Change isn't necessarily a good thing progress isn't a good thing for progress' sake, right? So the idea is that things are good, they don't want to change, right? That's what conservatism is, and at this point in the 19th century, conservatism is kind of thinking that monarchies are good, right? That's the way things have been, and effectively that's the way they should stay, is what they're saying. You also have liberalism, right? And that's kind of people looking for a bit more drastic change. So that, I'm sorry, this should actually be radicalism right here. So radicalism is kind of favoring drastic change. And then you have liberalism, which is kind of an in-between, right? That they want progress, but they want to do it correctly. They don't necessarily want to overthrow kings and queens and things like that to make it happen. They're happy to do it through governmental means, through parliaments and things like that, right, during the 19th century. So typically the wealth and the nobility and the kings and queens were conservatives. Usually liberals, radicals could come from kind of all different classes, and liberals kind of usually made up the middle class and the merchants. So this should say radicals, sorry guys, and this should also say radicalism right here. So that's our fault when we filled out the key. Okay, so I'm going to go now to the second part of this. And now would be a good time, I guess, to talk about the extra credit questions. So I'm going to give you, basically it'll be 2 points. And the extra credit questions are this weekend. I was at another track meet, so I like how these always end up being about track here, at least lately. So we had 2 events that set school records. One of them is even actually a U.S. top 10 right now, which is pretty cool. So the 4x8 boys, they set a school record and are currently 8th in the country. And then Joey DeBridney also set a school record in the 500. So if you can tell me what 2 events that there were school records set this past weekend, those will be your 2 points on your test. So moving on to absolutism. Okay, so let's talk about that. So you have absolutism, you have monarchies, right? You're going to have kind of people claim no limit to power, that they're getting their power from God, essentially, right? That they claim to rule by divine right, and they said that God created the monarchies, and therefore the king is only answerable to God himself, right? Sorry, my cat is right here, and he's on my lap, and he's being a little annoying. So anyway, you have these kings that they look to centralize their power, all power through the monarchy. So we talked about 3 big different kind of families in this absolutism phase in Europe, right? So you have the French, you have the Bourbon families, you have the Russian Romanovs, and you have the English Stuarts at that time. Okay, so you are going to have King Louis XIV in France, who is going to kind of subdue the nobles. He's going to kind of control the church, and he's also going to basically not call and subdue the legislature as well, the Estates General. Right? So by being able to kind of control these and eliminate these, it's going to consolidate power all in his hands, right? So by having all the power in his hands, he is the absolute ruler, and he is going to begin the process of creating this beautiful palace outside of Paris called Versailles, which I was actually in this past March, and it's pretty incredible if you ever get the chance to go see it. It's hard to explain without seeing it yourself, but it's incredibly lavish and beautiful and all that. It just kind of symbolizes the royal power at the time period and the wealth of France at the time, right? So he says this French phrase, l'état c'est moi, which I'm probably butchering again, but it means I am the state, right? So again, this whole idea of absolute power at the time. So moving on to Russia here, the Russian kings are known as the Tsar, usually spelled T-S-A-R. The Russian family at that point was the Romanovs, and we're going to have Peter the Great, right? So Peter the Great is going to he's going to travel into Western Europe, essentially, right? And he's going to look to Western-ize Russia with what he sees in Western Europe. He likes what he sees and wants to bring a lot of it back, and he feels that he can improve Russia himself. So we watched that little bit of a documentary on Peter the Great. Oh, why are you nipping me? Anyway, so he tries to Westernize it. He builds St. Petersburg in looking kind of at Amsterdam as a model, and other cities in Europe as well. So that's kind of what we need to know. He for Peter the Great anyway, and Russia at that point. So you are also going to have England, right? And this is where we're going to get the English Civil War, right? So you have some foundations of English freedoms. You have common law, the jury system, and the Magna Carta, that they're all going to kind of be in effect a little bit, but some of these rulers in particular are going to essentially... Sorry, all of these rulers, I'm just kind of reading ahead as I'm talking here. So you have, these rulers are the absolute rulers are kind of trying to take some of that for themselves, right? That's what absolutism means, right? So you are going to have James the First, Charles the Second, Charles the First, Charles II, and James the Second, right? And you're going to have, yep, so those are our four. You are going to get Oliver Cromwell in the middle, as far as being in charge here, right? So you're going to have Parliament. Sorry, anyway, okay, so let's keep rolling. So you have the English Civil War is fought between the King and Parliament, right? The English Parliament is going to be led by a man named Oliver Cromwell. He's going to kind of go up against Charles I and the Loyalists, and you're going the Royalists, and you're going to have political parties that develop out of a result of this, right? So Charles I is going to be executed and found guilty, essentially, by Oliver Cromwell and co. after he loses this bit of civil war. And when he does... Sorry, Oliver Cromwell will basically be in charge after that, but then after that you're going to get the restoration of the monarchy with Charles II, right? So that's why you have James I, Charles II, Oliver Cromwell's in the middle, you're going to get Charles II, and then you're going to get James II, right? So after that, you're going to now have the English Glorious Revolution is called, which then they become to invite the King and Queen of England back. During this, it's going to be William and Mary, as long as they agree to the English Bill of Rights here, right? So, and going into our last little bit here, just looking ahead, you have the Italian and Prussian unifications, right? So you have the main two men responsible for the Italian unification is this man named Count Cavour and Giuseppe Garibaldi. So the Count Cavour is going to unify northern Italy. Garibaldi is going to kind of come up from the south and eventually unify southern and northern Italy, which then the last Italian states to be unified is going to essentially be the Papal States, right? The ones associated with Vatican City and Rome, and eventually that's what the Pope is going to be, all it's going to be left with, is going to be left with Vatican City, essentially. So Italy will be unified at that point. So you also have now the German unification. So you have Otto von Bismarck, who's going to be the main prime minister that's going to be responsible for this. His nickname is going to be the Iron Chancellor, for just his behavior and his outlook and mindset going into this unification. So he says he's going to settle all this basically through iron and blood, through the industrious nature of the Prussians and the military, and through blood if necessary, right? So how many wars? A bunch of them. There's going to be several wars that are fought here. His actions are, you have this whole concept of realpolitik. So the Absolutism PowerPoints are posted on Google Classroom. I'll show you where they are. So I think the ones initially didn't work out, but if you go above it, there are actually PDFs, but I'll show you where that is when I'm done with this, okay? So you have realpolitik, right? So he's going to end up in war with Austria, France, and Italy at some point. You're going to get the Franco-Prussian War, which is going to be the last war that's going to kind of effectively unify the Germans together in between 1870 and 1871, when the Germans are effectively going to just steamroll the French. They're going to march all the way essentially to Paris. And such. And this is going to, with taking some of the territory here, in particular in Alsace-Lorraine, you're going to lay the foundations of World War I and the animosity between the different groups, right? So you are going to have Kaiser Wilhelm, who's going to declare himself the Emperor of Germany, the Kaiser of Germany, through realpolitik and such, which all do basically the politics of reality and do what you need to do to achieve and hold power, essentially. In Germany, right? All right, so home stretch here with the last little bit, and any last questions I can answer, I will, and then I'll leave you guys to it. So you have the Latin American revolutions as well. So let's look at the cities here. You should know that Buenos Aires is in Argentina. You have Mexico City in Mexico. Lima is in Peru. Sao Paulo is in Brazil. Havana is in Cuba, right? So you have important revolutionary figures in Haiti as a man in Toussaint I can't say the French, Louverture. You have Mexico, you have Father Miguel Hidalgo, who will be the leader there. That's going to be the father of Mexican independence. And you're going to have Simón Bolívar, who's going to kind of lead independence in northern South America, right? So you have this whole idea of mercantilism, the whole to provide materials for the mother country as well as markets for the mother country. So we know that there's a rapid decline of native populations after the Spanish conquest in Latin America, mostly as the diseases are going to just decimate, 90+% of the native populations. You're going to have the introduction of African slaves when the Native Americans don't necessarily work out as slaves for a number of reasons. And so you're going to also get the implementation of this rigid class system in Latin America, right? You have the encomienda system, it's called, where you have the peninsulares, the people that are born in Spain are going to be the top government officials. Creoles are going to be next, but they're Spanish people that are born in America, and they're not necessarily seen as high birth as the peninsulares who are actually from Spain, right? Next group, you have the Mestizos, who are going to be the mixed European and native blood. You're going to have the mulattoes, who are going to now be the mixed European and African blood, kind of further down the ring, and then rung. Then lastly, you're going to have the Africans, which are slaves and slave descendants, kind of the bottom of the social caste system, encomienda system, if you will, in Latin America. Right? So, which group of people was given the authority to govern these lands that they conquer is going to be the conquistadors, right? Pizarro and Cortez and Columbus, right? All of these people are going to actually act as governors of their territories for a little while in these areas, right? And these people are going to effectively be called viceroys or viceroyalty, right? So they're kind of the next in line there, kind of the top dog, almost king-like person in that area, and they answer to the king alone, right? In their home country, mother country, right? Christianity is going to be implemented in Latin America. You're going to have missionaries that are trying to convert many of the Native Americans. You're also going to have this mining systems that are put in place and slaves being used in the mines, silver mines in particular of Mexico and Latin America, right? So we know that the American Revolution and the French Revolution as well as the Enlightenment are, and hundreds of years of this system and people being fed up with this system is going to lead to people being frustrated enough to revolt themselves in Latin America, right? So you have the Mestizos and the natives being encouraged by Father Miguel Hidalgo to revolt against the Spanish, and they're going to end up being successful. You're going to have Simón Bolívar, who is a Creole, and not necessarily at the top of the totem pole here, who's going to unite these people in northern South America, in particular in Colombia and Venezuela today, where they're going to liberate themselves from Spanish rule and instill democracies in these particular countries, right? You're going to have a slave population kind of overthrow French rule in Haiti, where they're going to rebel and they're going to abolish slavery. They're going to become independent from this man Toussaint Louverture, where he was a former slave, essentially. And then lastly, you're going to have what's known as the Monroe Doctrine. So as these democracies, fledgling democracies in Latin America get rolling, essentially, you have America looking at it as an opportunity and seeing these people as friends, essentially, that it's going to get rid of the European influence in these areas, and America's very happy about that. So they basically say that any European power that's stepping into Latin America and South America in the Western Hemisphere at this point, it's not okay, and that America can see this as an act of war, essentially. So they need to leave these new fledgling democracies alone, and that any movement against them is a threat to the United States, right? And they need, and in return, the United States is going to stay out of European affairs. So it's basically like, you mind your business, we'll mind our business, and it basically means that America is acknowledging Latin American independence. Okay? So that said, that's about it. I know the study guide is obviously important, but I'd look through your notes and things like that too. So let's look at Google Classroom here to go back to those absolutism notes so I can show you where they are. You got to go back a ways here to Napoleon, debate, French Revolution. So right here, so November 26th, it's a good way back. That's the scientific revolution and enlightenment. Sorry, that's not absolutism. Let me go back further here. If not, I can post them. So this is the English Civil War ones right here, October 31st. They are there. And then the absolute rulers of Russia are here. So they are there. If you still need me to post it after you're seeing this, I should be able to as well. But it looks like they are there. So can you guys not open them? I'm going to stop the live stream at this point. I can just keep chatting in chat while we get that figured out. So, but we are done with the live stream. So good luck studying. We'll see you guys tomorrow and Tuesday.